codes get put in place by the experiences in those formative years, 8 to 18, and really even all the way up to 25, as we're developing our capacity around logic and thinking. But we're watching the world and the events and the icons and the emotions that happen with it. And when there's an event and it's paired with an emotion, it creates an imprint, a groove, really, a part of our code, part of an algorithm that's running in the background. The key thing is we continue to reference that algorithm throughout our life, but it is an algorithm, it is not ransomware. So at any point, we can pull it out of the background where it's been running and reevaluate. Do those variables still hold the same weight, same water, same influence, or are they needing to be updated, upgraded, elevated? And so we can absolutely make new choices. We are not locked into it, but we do default to it if we haven't examined it. And we also default to it when we feel threatened or in times of stress, right? We'll go back to old code. And we do this in many areas of our life, right? When under stress, we go back to old eating patterns. When under stress, we go back to, sleeping or that kind of thing. So it's not that it's, completely outside the understanding of humanity. It's very common. That's why it's really important to be able to pause and say, what is driving this action or reaction or this choice? And notice, is that producing the future I want? And then make a new choice. So it's important to pause, notice, and choose around our code.
Yeah. Elan, you had something?
Yeah, I'd love to ask you questions about evaluating your background programming or your codes. And the reason I ask is because, as that younger millennial, I'll be in the workforce for the next 40 years or so. And I want to protect not just Gen Z, but Gen Alpha and Gen Beta, who I will oversee in my career, from the rage, or at least what I've received as rage from older generations about myself. So I feel like millennials, this is a common thing that we see in meme culture a lot, is especially from traditionalists and boomers. I feel like we kind of run into the perspective, well, I had to do it, so now that you're not having to do it, there's an unfairness that's being produced, and we don't want to hear that. So I've felt maybe a little bit of contempt and rage from older generations, or I've heard millennials just don't want to work, we don't work hard, and we're very self-centered. So how do I evaluate my generational codes to protect Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and Gen Beta from that contempt that I think is we see in a lot of areas, and not just in work. I think a lot of times people, if they experience something negative, it hurts to see that other people never even have to think about it,
Yeah. Oh, that is such a brilliant question. Thank you. So there's two aspects of an answer to that. Some that, the listening audience might really enjoy, and some it might really tick you off about what I'm about to say, right?
Oh no, here it comes.
Yeah, here it comes, right? So because it's when someone in a leadership position gets angry and rageful at you, they are leaking an area of trauma for them. This is not a healthy thing. And I get it. There was an old code about, our traditionalists. The military was their training. And so we had officers of the company, and we saw many modalities brought in from the military and plunked right into our organizations. And baby boomers came under the influence of that too. And in that model, you had a leader that yelled at you. Yes, in the context of it could save your life if you were in battle, you followed the leader with no questions asked. But we also had a lot of parents that did not have a lot of training around parenting and what it did to the child when you scream at the child. And they brought some of those aspects of trauma from their own family into the workplace and used it on the young people they were quote unquote leading. And yet in their own kids, they were doing a kinder, gentler approach or trying it. And maybe not. Sometimes we didn't see them doing that either. And so when someone is enraged at another generation, it's actually showing their weakness or their area of trauma that they're still triggered in, because that's not an appropriate response in leadership. Historically, old code. That is what people had to survive. And so the good news is, I love your thinking for Z, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta, that what we are creating now is the workplace. And this has been building as millennials entered the workforce. So this is not just brand spanking new. There is a momentum that's been building for the last 15 years, particularly the last 10, and then in the last 3 with the pandemic, really showing us what was possible when we expanded our, what I call currencies of meaning, and we included compassion, and we included a new awareness of stability and significance and happiness, along with time and money. Now we have a generation that is saying, how do we make this work for all so that I can do the next 40 years of work in a healthy way? Because we're seeing the impact on our baby boomers and our Gen Xers too, of the mental health stress and duress that is showing up in health issues. And millennials and Gen Z and Gen Xers too are saying, I don't want that. So we're having new conversations when we think about it. So now you say, how do I help or understand when a leader is getting angry at me? The first thing is being able to say, that's not personal. Oftentimes that's generational about how they're approaching it. So as opposed to immediately taking it personal and saying, I'm done, I'm out, I'm removing myself from this, to say in that moment to that person, could we have a conversation about this? Maybe not right now. I'd like to set up a time when they're not in that particular level of rage or upset or that kind of thing. And at that point, you actually say, I'm curious about that response and that approach because it doesn't seem to match what was happening at the moment. Can we talk more about that? And actually beginning that dialogue. Now, is that super hard if this person's directly, in charge of you? Yes. But more and more leaders are understanding that talent, millennials and Gen Z, recognize they don't have to stay in a bullying or a unhealthy environment. And so more and more leaders are having to up-level their own emotional intelligence and their capacity in the workplace to lead from a place of not just anger and rage, but lead from a place of motivation and nourishing development.